Parsha Shelach. This is like the interweaving of two major themes here. What we're doing and what the Parsha is talking about. It's all one of the same thing. On one hand, it's a secondary reality. It's like a unconscious thread. People don't think about it very often. They know the spies once happened. It was a terrible event with dramatic results, but they don't really connect it up to current events and the responsibility. They don't look at it in terms of what we're fixing up over thousands of years. Really, is the morality in the end. That what they did wrong was as the Torah says, this week's parsha was a straw that broke the camel's back. Most people today don't even understand how it's possible that you can reject the land and reject Hashem at the same time if you're still keeping Torah mitzvahs. How does that work? What does the land actually represent? As history, Jewish history is extremely convoluted, and we make it convoluted. It doesn't have to be that way. HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't want to make it that way. HaKadosh Baruch Hu would have preferred to take us from Har Sinai to Eretz Israel, but derech Plishtim, 11 days. That was the ideal, 11 days journey. We didn't quite get it right. We left a little bit too quickly, as Tosfos points out in last week's parsha. That was the first chet that Rashi alludes to, that the reason why the upside down nuns come in the parsha to break up between one puryanot and another puryanot, between one punishment and chet and one chet and punishment. The first one was asking for the bread, asking for the meat. We didn't need that. The second one was asking for the bread and the meat. The first one was the fact that we left Har Sinai too quickly. And it's not that we ran away like school children, but there was a lack of regret. There was a lack of chavivus, of the event, of the moment, that people didn't feel. It's like when you go on vacation, you enjoyed yourself, but you got to go. The hotel's kicking you out already. You got to pack up the bags. You got to move out. But there's a sense of I wish I could stay longer. I wish this was like a 2-week vacation as opposed to a 1-week vacation, right? And it should have been like that way when we left Har Sinai. It should have been like, okay, we have to go. We have to move on. Eretz Israel is the ultimate destination. But boy, I wish we could have stayed here longer. And that lack of connection, that lack of desire to remain at Har Sinai was indicative of an internal virus, so to speak, if you will, that we contacted with our interaction with Amalek. Because this is a very important rule, that you cannot interact with anybody without being mushpah from them on some level. Adam Arishon from the Eitzadas Tovara, when he began to look at the tree, he was mushpah, right? There was an influence. The Rizal brings down that really, ideally speaking, that actually it's a good thing to hang out with the wrong people, because a lot of times they have, and this is for people who are trained and capable of doing this, but he says because the evil people in history tend to have a few good traits and mostly bad traits, and the tzaddikim, the reverse. They have all the good traits and a few bad traits. So by interacting with the Rasha, he says, it's a big chiddush, especially for parents with kids, right? By interacting with the Rasha, he absorbs the good out of the Rasha, and he gives over to the Rasha the evil that was inside of himself. So it's actually a process of perfecting the tzaddik and completing the evil of the Rasha. That's the way he explains it. But there's no parent that's going to let his kid play with somebody else's kid who's not on the and say, because one day must make my kid a tzaddik one day. It doesn't usually work out that way, but that's the concept. But for the most part, basically, it's we know that you're mushpah. A person is mashpia on somebody by interacting. If you just happen to be passing each other, and there's no, it's amazing. Even a small thing, but this is like a really small thing, but it shows you how it works to some degree. If I'm walking down the street and I happen to pass somebody and he says good morning, as I'm walking by, that good morning will carry me for 25, 30. I'll be thinking about that good morning for a little while because it feels so good that someone was friendly. I guess because I need friends, It's so nice to have friends. You have so few friends, and have a few to say hello. It's like, it makes you feel good the rest of your day. No, but there's a connection that takes place. Even just making eye contact with somebody, it brings out a certain hashpah. So the fact that we fought Amalek, we won the battle, but we lost the war temporarily, and that was clearly the result, because HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself says that I'm at war with Amalek midor dor. This didn't end over here. This is a temporary respite, right, or respite, depends where you're from, right? Respite, from this battle. But as a result of this, as we said before, the experience of Har Sinai was not a complete one. It should have been the completion of the Gula from Mitzrayim. The receiving of Torah, Har Sinai, should have been the shleimus of the Gula. The fact that it wasn't, and the fact that a golden calf could be built within 40 days of actually getting to Har Sinai, after all the fantastic accomplishments, indicates that whatever we've achieved was really more superficial, was not really deep within, and the transformation wasn't yet complete. And that's the effect of Amalek. Amalek, and anybody you come across along the way, you meet along the way, will be mashpia on you. So that's why it's very important to either have your guard up, or at least to be to try and protect yourself from such influences in the end. And that goes right for living in the diaspora as well, living in Galus, living amongst the Gentile nations. There's going to be a hashpa. You can't get around it. You can build all the walls you want. You can go into the forest. You can build all the barriers between you and the rest of the world, but it spills over. Somehow, in some way, it's always going to spill over on some kind of spiritual level. That's the way it works, especially when you're living in Chutz La'aretz. So, I forgot the whole thread that led to this in the first place. Went off on a tangent over here.
You were talking about being mashpia. In other words, the whole concept of being mashpia.
Right, before that.
No matter how little it was, being at Har Sinai. You remember being at Har Sinai, and it should have only taken 11 days. And as a result
right. That's the point. That was the point. Thanks. And it should have only taken 11 days. The fact that it didn't take 11 days was because of the fact that we were mushpa from Amalek. There was a carryover from Amalek that resulted in the Egel Zahav, that resulted in Moshe Rabbeinu breaking the luchos, and then having the second luchos, which is not the same level. It's all basically downhill. And the Maraglim was an inevitable result of that entire influence. We make it convoluted as a result of the fact that we don't do things straightforward, that we don't take the responsibility, that we're not prepared to be Moshe Nefesh for whatever reason. We don't take the bull by the horns and do it the way it's supposed to be done. A few people do. A few people will. History, for the most part, is about individuals that do make that type of a decision, and
How was it convoluted?
Because it's going to become convoluted. We haven't got there yet, right? The fact that it wouldn't, if we had accepted Eretz Yisrael at that time, but we couldn't because what happened with Egel Zahav, with Amalek. But if we had somehow were able to do tshuva and go into the land when it was supposed to have been the way, receive the land in 11 days, like the ideal situation would have been, because 11 is a significant number, represents the das, represents the tikkun. We're always fixing up on a deep level, on the deepest of level. We're fixing up 11 lights. 11 lights that were not rectified by Ma'aseh Bereishis specifically, that we should fix them up. The 11 is always going to be, any 11, by definition, is always going to be an allusion back to this idea of rectifying these lights. That's why the moon has its cycle is 11 days less than the solar cycle. And by Hilchos Nida is 11 days. All these 11s, there were 11 days by the 11 amas behind the Beis Hamikdash. It shows up the Ketores is the best one of all. There are 11 spices. It's all for the sake of fixing up the das, all for the sake of fixing up these 11 lights. That's Kabbalah. But that's what we're doing. That's the
Shema, 25 plus 11, right?
Right, that's the 11, each equals to 36, the Gilui of the Shkira. That's the Chanukah Shir. Right, but it's all the same thing. Ayeka, it's all the same idea. So, we didn't do that, and as a result of that, we now Kosh Baruch Hu has to bring about the Gula in a backhanded way, a backwards way. That's the key, that's the clue. Jewish history has so many stories, just in Tanakh alone, of backwards moments, of people being rejected who should have been accepted, people who accepted who should have been rejected. But it's always like this twisting and turning. Ad Kedei Kach, even today, we have all the things happening historically where we look back and we see that things happen through people who we would never believe they would be the messengers of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, either because they weren't religious, or they weren't religious enough, or because they're Amratzim, But in the end, it happened in a way that at the time it was taking place, many people scoff, many people don't believe, and that's because we don't do it straightforward. Because what happens, there's a timeline to history. If there was no timeline to history, if history was meant to go on for as long as it has to go on, for the Jewish people to become whoever they have to become over whatever long period of time it can transpire. If Kosh Baruch Hu says, I got no problem, I got forever. It's like, you guys want to take forever? It's up to you. You want to be the next generation? Great. You don't want to be the next generation? Fine. You want 15 generations from now to be the ones that get it right? Seder, I got all the time in the world. You want to go through all the kind of history that's going to happen in the meantime? That's your business over here. I'm God. I'm eternal. I know the future already. It doesn't happen like that. Because Baruch Hu has a set amount of time. There are 6,000 years to history. In the course of that 6,000 years, there has to be Techiyas HaMeisim, resurrection of the dead. There has to be the Messianic era. There are deadlines. There are katzim. There are things that have to happen by certain dates. So that puts the pressure on. So once the pressure is on, then at that point in time, because Baruch Hu still wants to accomplish his goals, but like any good parent, He's not going to simply capitulate to the spoiled brattiness of the child and give the child his success when he hasn't earned it yet. So therefore, the success that should have come to the Jewish people has to still happen, but it can't happen through them anymore. We lost that right. We lost that schus. So therefore, that creates a concept called mirma utachbolus, which we...
What do you mean it couldn't come through? What do you mean it couldn't come through them? What are you talking about? Say that.
Through the Jewish people, through the Meraglim, through the generation, right? That's just one example. It's going to happen through the next generation, and eventually it's going to happen through people who we would never even know. The stories in Tanakh of what's his name? Was it Ehud? Who is it? Who was the one that was born? He was born illegitimate parents. Forgot his name. Is it Ehud? No. He became a shofet in the end. The point is that they rejected him. The Chachamim, everybody rejected him. Then they had to go to war, and they came looking for him because he was the strongest of all, the one who could lead them in battle.
No. That's the one whose daughter, remember?
Not Yiftach. Was it not Yiftach?
No,
I think it was
Was it Yiftach? Was it Yiftach? Oh, so it was Yiftach. Oh, so it was. There's somebody else also, by the way. There's somebody else. I don't think Yiftach was. Check it out. Having a senior moment over here. Somebody in Tanakh had the situation happen to him, and you reread it. We think to ourselves, well, that's an interesting story. Next, right? Absorb it. What's the message over here? What's going on? Rus and what's her name? Rachav, and Tamar and Yehuda, and all these examples all through history where things are happening in backdoor ways. So in the beginning, everybody was from, and of course the best story of all is Yosef. Yosef is, he's the greatest story of all because he was so rejected by everybody. There's no way in the world they believed, they couldn't possibly see how he was somebody through whom a Kosh Baruch Hu could work. They thought he was a Rasha. He may have been from, he may have been keeping mitzvahs, whatever they had at that point in time, but they saw him as a Rasha. He had to be dealt with. He had to be destroyed. He had to be killed. They dunned him. They judged him. There's this Sanhedrin that decided he was no good for the future of the Jewish people. And therefore they decided there's no way in the world. That's why the Or Chaim points out, which I'll get to later on, B'ezras Hashem, that it mentions that Yosef recognized them twice. Because, as we said before, that they couldn't recognize him. There was no one in the world, in spite of all the hints he was giving them, all the hints he was trying to relate to them because he wanted to be found out. He wanted them to guess it was him. He was doing everything he could, but again, he couldn't give it to them because that was part of the tikkun process, to get them to change their way of thinking, the way they were looking at things, and they still couldn't get it until he finally says, "Ani Yosef." He has to reveal himself because but how is that possible? How could they go so far down the road after all the hints and all things going on? Because there's no way in the world. It can't happen through him. I don't care. It's not in my intellectual vocabulary that God is going to bring the redemption through him. No way. No how. Okay. They find it otherwise. They pay for it. They pay for, for 22 years they pay for it. They suffer because of it. Humiliation. They suffer the pain of their father not being able to stop mourning. And eventually they suffer the shock of finding out how wrong, in fact, they actually were. It's in the past. We got over that one. We learned our lesson from that one. Let's just leave it behind. Let's talk about it when the Parsha comes around. Let's teach our kids to be done like schus and all these things. But in terms of Jewish history, that's the past. Says the Medrash, that's not the past. That's the present. Because the Medrash says, in Parshas Vayeshev, the Tchum of Parshas Vayeshev, all that happened to Yosef is going to happen to Tzion. The gematria of Yosef and Tzion are the same, and it goes to the whole list of things. Whatever Yosef went through is going to happen to Tzion. So what is that? Nobody's going to believe it's happening. Nobody's going to believe in the people who are making it happening because they're all going to. There's no way in the world it can happen through him. So a person will come back and say, yeah, but Yosef at least was from. Well, they thought he was a Rasha, and in those days everybody was from. But all through history, things shift and change. Achav's army didn't suffer a single loss because they were mechaved one another. They didn't speak lashon hara. David HaMelech's army, they were from, and they suffered losses because they sinas chinam. They had to show the proper respect to each other. The Gemara says. The Gemara throws these things out at us all the time. It's amazing how many ramazim, how many things the Gemara and Tanakh and all of our teachings teach us about how convoluted history really is, how backwards everything is. Because since we're so backwards in our approach, because Baruch is forced to be backwards to rectify the situations, like two negatives equal a positive in the end. So just to reiterate what the Rizal said, right? Mirma utachbolus is the reason for the episodes of Tamar, Rus, Rachav the prostitute, all the souls of converts, And all the kings from David and Mashiach, because from the line of David, you have Menashe, you have all these kings of the from Yehuda who also stood the Jewish people aside, who will come from Rus the Moabite and the union of Yehuda and Tamar. Rabbi Akiva himself was the son of converts who descended from Sisera. This is the trickery and scheming that the Holy One, blessed he, uses against the Klippas in order to free a soul exploited amongst them. So we won't go through the whole Stom thing like we went through last week. Just look at last week's shir, see for yourself. But the point is there's this thing called Mirma Utachbolis. These are words that it's a classic example of a sod, of a Kabbalistic idea that has to be understood on a Pshat level. You have to understand. Mirma means trickery, right? That's the way it's used in Tanakh. It means trickery. Mirma is tricky, to trick somebody. Tachbolis is like machinations. It's like scheming. You have to be tricky and you have to scheme. Because Baruch Hu is a tricky God and a scheming God. Why? Because he has to fool the Klippas. What are the Klippas? We spoke about the Klippas last week. The Klippas represents the reality of spiritual impurity in creation, but whereas we might have thought it was simply like dirt, where it has no personality, it just has to be dirty. You walk into a dirty place, there's mud on the walls, there's mud on the floor, and you get dirty. You have to shower and wash yourself off, but what's the big deal? It's not like you were transformed by it, because it has no personality, it has no will of its own, unlike the Klippas, or the Sitrach, the Satan, everyone referred to the Tzahara. They seem to have a personality, they seem to have a personification. They plan, right? Because they're there specifically to obstruct our path, that we should use our free will to overcome the obstacles they create. They're the challenge. That's why it says Tov, Yetzer Tov, Ma'od, right, the creation of Adam Arishon, because Baruch Hu looks back and says, only on day 6, he saw what he created, it's Tov Ma'od. Says the Medrash, Tov is the Yetzer Tov, Ma'od is the Yetzer Hara. Because without that, there's no Yetzer Tov. You need both. In order to have a Yetzer Tov, you have to have the Yetzer Hara, otherwise basically a person is just a robot. There's just a malach, even better. So the Yetzer Hara is there to obstruct us, to make it that we will use our free will and make moral decisions in spite of the desire to go someplace else and do things a different way. That's the way it works. The Klippas work for the Sitra Achra. There is messengers. There's different ways of looking at them. They can be seen actually as a void sometimes, just as a void, as opposed to something actual that exists in reality. But the Klippas, however you want to talk about them and describe them, the bottom line is the Klippas are there to act as agents for the Sitra Achra, to create realities that block a person from being able to connect to Hashem. That's why it's called a Klippa. Klippa is like a peel. A peel is what stands between you and the orange. The orange on the inside, there's the peel, there's the outside reality. It's a crust, incrustation. I think is the way Art Scroll translates it in Vice versa Omer, right? It's that which obstructs you getting to where you have to go. So the Klippas obstruct your path to Hashem. That's their job. So you will work on trying to get rid of them. It's a whole. The Klippas is like a major topic in Sod, in the realm of Kabbalah. But the point is that because Baruch Hu, the way he structured creation, and he likes to live by his rules that he creates, he does not like to break them. The Klippas also working for the Sitra Achra. What's the Sitra Achra? Basically, he has 3 hats. He wears 3 hats at Sitra Achra. He's the one who tests us. He's the one basically who creates a situation that creates the test, the Nisayan for us. Then he's the one who will prosecute if we happen to fail the test. We happen to stumble along the path, right? He's the one who then prosecutes. He takes off his hat as being the one, the mikshel, the one who creates the stumbling block, right? Puts on a new hat called prosecuting attorney. He goes up to the Beis Din Shalamala and says, this guy, basically, I tested him. This is what he did. He didn't respond properly. Then the Beis Din will decide where you're coming from. The Beis Din will say, yeah, but that's because he came from a certain family, or they'll say, you're right, he should have known better. They'll decide, whether the person is really guilty or not. And if it turns out that the Sitra Achra is successful in prosecuting the person, so then he puts on a different hat called the executioner. So now he's the punisher. He's the one carrying out the actual punishment. Those are the 3 jobs he has to keep. That's his job. That's how he keeps a system of judgment and balance and din within creation. Eventually he loses his job. Once in Yemos Mashiach, the Tzahara is finally taken away from mankind. No one can do a chet anymore. He has no job anymore. Which is why he keeps trying to keep them going as long as he possibly can. Pushes it off. But he works for God. He's an agent of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's the bottom line. And he's really a charusa for a person who understands him and is able to work with it to become a better person. Is if you don't pay attention to him and you don't understand him, where he's coming from, what he's trying to do, so then you become prey to him. The worst, by the modern psychology, what it did for the most part was take away the consciousness of the Yetzer Hara. Even the Christian will, for the longest time, believed in the concept of a devil, something inside mankind trying to steer him astray. Modern psychology came along and said, no, people have, they have these thoughts, they have these things. It's part of who you are, for better or for worse, for good or for bad, right? You have to learn how to work with that. But it doesn't mean you're evil per se. And you're right, it doesn't mean you're evil per se. But you have to realize that there's a thing called the Yetzer Hara. It's going to challenge you, and you have to overcome it. And if you don't, then basically you push off your success, your spiritual success. And the Sitra Achra has reshus. He has permission from God to be able to go and challenge a person. And if the person does fail at what they're supposed to achieve, he has permission basically to keep pushing that person down that path until they finally wake up. The only problem is that in spite of all that, since there is a timeline, since there is a situation where we have to accomplish certain national goals by a certain time, and for a person also, but it's less for a person than it is for the nation. Because a person can have many Gilgulim. The nation doesn't have Gilgulim. The nation goes on and on and on, but not forever. So therefore, Kadosh Baruch Hu, in order to work within the system with the Sitra Achra, he has to basically, he's given permission to the Sitra Achra to be able to prosecute and stand in the way. At the same time, Kadosh Baruch Hu has to stick to his timeline. So he's between a hard rock and a wall, so to speak, in the end. So how does he get around that? With this concept called Mimur Tachbolos, where he brings about the same result that's supposed to happen, but in a way that does not look like it's happening. Because if he did, the Sitra Achra would be able to say, that's not fair. They don't deserve that. That shouldn't happen. They should remain in exile. We find a similar, this is a function of mercy, it's a function of Rachmanis. It's not just Kadosh Baruch Hu cheating on behalf of the Jewish people, it's a function of mercy. We find the exact same thing happening by Kriyas Yamsuf. By Kriyas Yamsuf, the Jewish people are standing there, and the Midas Hadin, actually the Sitra Achra, says to Kadosh Baruch Hu, you don't plan to save them and drown the Egyptians, do you? After all, halalli of the Vodazara, halalli of the Vodazara. They both were guilty, of worshiping idols. So it says at that point in time, the sea overhearing this conversation, because the Sitra Achra spoke loud specifically to anger the sea, that the sea would want to drown the Jewish people crossing, going across. So at that point in time, the sea is saying, I'm going to drown these people, then they don't deserve to survive. So Kadosh Baruch Hu says, well, the only thing is that the Jewish people did it mitoch shibud, and the Mitzrayim did it mitoch ratzon. The Egyptians chose this way of life on their own. There was no hechrach. There was nothing forcing them to be of the Vodazara. And the Jewish people, if you're living amongst the Egyptians for so long, you're bound to pick up their ways, just like living in America. We're going to pick up their ways. You live in Canada, you pick up the ways of the Canadians, because when you live someplace for a long time, you're going to be affected. It's the hashpah in the end, right? So at that point in time, when the sea heard that, it decided that it's not going to drown the Jewish people. Instead, it's going to drown the Egyptians because they're the guilty ones over here. There's another version, and the version is basically... The sea made the decision? Really Kadosh Baruch Hu, but the sea made the decision, yeah. The sea made the decision. It vented its anger instead on the Egyptians instead. That's the way the Medrash presents it. They're all agents of a Kadosh Baruch Hu, but this is the way that it's presented. The other version is that really the Jewish people should have drowned, because the truth is even Kadosh Baruch Hu agreed that they weren't worthy of crossing the sea and surviving, but there was a haftacha, there was a bris. The bris was that somebody's going to survive from Egypt, from the fourth generation, that's going to get to Eretz Canaan, however, and turn the lights on. Somebody had to do it. So even if we weren't worthy of crossing the sea on our own to get to Eretz Canaan, nonetheless, we had to do it because the Kadosh Baruch Hu decided that has to happen for the sake of Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. That's where the Medrash says it. But you have the Sitra Achra over here accusing, and it's an accusation. Kadosh Baruch Hu has a choice. Either he can say, okay, that's fine, you're true, whatever you're saying is true, but I'm God. I can bend the rules when I want to. Rules were meant to be broken by me. That I guess not exactly like that, but I can bend the rules when I want to. Kadosh Baruch Hu doesn't like to do that. He doesn't like to bend the rules. So instead, he finds ways to get around them. He finds loopholes, so to speak. So we're not much different than he is, in that respect, looking for these loopholes. So what does he do? So the Medrash says that's where the book of Eov actually begins, at that point in time. And that's what we said before. It mentions Shir Shoyam, Yemin Hashem Tiretz Oyev. The letters of Tiretz Oyev is really Tzaras Iyov, which means the leprosy of Iyov, because the Jewish people were shown at the sea how Iyov was the scapegoat for them to cross the sea. And I don't want to go through the whole story all over again, but just in short, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu used Iyov as the distraction to pull the Sitra Achra away from the Yam Suf, so he would stop accusing them, and therefore he'd split the sea and save the Jewish people. They didn't deserve it. The Sitra Achra was right. Because Baruch Hu took away the accusation by taking the Sitra Achra away from the sea, by sending him instead to Iyov. Iyov became worthy of this honorable distinction, or dishonorable distinction, because back in Mitzrayim, when Paro took a vote of what to do with the Jewish people, he pleaded the Fifth Amendment. Or according to the Zohar, he said, don't kill them, just take their money and make their bodies suffer, but he did not free them. He could have been the one to free them and be the deciding vote, so therefore measure for measure. He was now the vehicle to free them by the Yam Suf. So this is an example of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's mercy. Even though according to the laws of creation they were guilty, the Jewish people really had to drown. They really should drown there because they were not worthy of crossing the sea. They were right. They sensed it. They felt it. Their own guilt. They knew that was going to be the case. But thank God for Bris Avos. Thank God for the covenant that HaKadosh Baruch Hu made with Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, because that covenant was the reason to send the Sitra Achra away from the Yam Suf to be able to take us across miraculously, even though the din was against us. And that's the concept. That's Mimut Tachbolis. The din's against us. The Sitra Achra is right. We don't deserve it. There's only one problem. There's a bris. Not the one where you go to Nevasuda. Right? There's a bris made with Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. History has to reach certain destinations by certain times, and we may not be the ones to bring it about, but HaKadosh Baruch Hu does it on our behalf, behind our back, but it has to happen in a way that doesn't look like it's taking place, because if it did, the Sitra Achra would come back with his accusations, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu would be forced, Kiviyachah, to listen to them. So therefore, HaKadosh Baruch Hu frames it in a way that it's actually a Gula event taking place, but it doesn't look like that. I mean, this is hugely important.
This fact of Kodesh Baruch Hu interceding by making a subterfuge, a miramis tapolis, right? And he did it primarily because of the promise that was made to the.
That's the driving force.
Now, there are other times in history when we are also undeserving. And
other times, tons of times.
Okay, now, is each time Bris Avos the reason why we
all the way to the end?
Huh?
All the way to the end of history. All the way until Yemos Mashiach, until HaKadosh Baruch Hu can say to Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, I fulfilled my promise. I promised this land would be yours, your descendants. Eventually in history, there'll be a messianic era. I promised you all those things. I have now fulfilled that promise. So the bottom line by Kodesh Baruch Hu always is going to be is that even though you cannot always figure out during the crisis why it's taking place, you can after the crisis by what results. The results will always be 100% true. Kodesh Baruch Hu never misses. Whatever he does, there's no such thing as random history, there's no such thing as coincidence. Whatever Kodesh Baruch Hu does, by definition, is always meant to achieve a certain tafkid, a certain purpose, and he will never miss, even though we won't always relate to it. So, for example, if the Holocaust brought an end to European Jewry for the most part, and we never really recovered there, and it forced us to go either one of two places, there's Israel or to America, and the reason why it forced us to go to America was because, again, we weren't zeicha to go from Europe to Eretz Israel. We should have. Why shouldn't have we? Why couldn't the Gula have taken place after Europe? Why couldn't Europe have been the last station? Every place can be the last station. Spain can be the last station, right?
Same reason why we didn't get into Eretz Israel in 11 days.
Yeah. And if we're not going to do it the proper way, it's going to have to happen in Mimah Tachbol. It's going to happen in a very backhanded and sometimes very dangerous way, a disastrous way. Who's guilty and why the person died and that person didn't die and why this person died like that? No, that's already an area we don't get into. We can't evaluate a person's personal cheshbon. That we can't do. The same way we can't speak Lashon Hara. You can't speak Lashon Hara because who are you to know where this guy came from? What he was like when he was growing up, what his parents were like when in his house, and his brothers and sisters, and his school, and the media. that affected him, and that's only this lifetime. What about the previous lifetime? All the other Gilgul, how do you know where this guy came from? Because Baruch Hu is the only one. And when you speak Lashon Hara, it's Ki'ilu, you're playing God. It's a Avodah Zarah. It's a Avodah Zarah. Because you're saying, I can make that decision. It doesn't work that way. So why these 6 million and not that 6 million, or this kid and not that child, or this parent, and no, that's already Kosh Baruch Hu's cheshbon.
Well, the ones that went to the United States, that went to the United States or Canada or wherever they went, South America, when they were escaping from Europe, the ones that did escape from Europe prior to the Holocaust. Yeah. Why is it that a Kodesh Baruch Hu, didn't, take them and give them the scoop to go to Eretz Israel versus other people going around the world? This is what's confusing me. In other words, the fact is they escaped. So what motivated them?
At what time?
This prior to
the 30s.
Yeah, the 30s. When people were started, the Zionist movement was at that particular point in time, and people could have started to go to Eretz Israel because of what was happening in BaMidbar.
Right.
Instead, people started going to the United States. So the fact remains: was it the pull of materialism that brought them there, or what was it? Was that the?
That may have been the vehicle that Kosh Baruch Hu used to pull them, but already the fact that they were going there is because Kosh Baruch Hu said this gula is going to have to be built through America. We lost the schus to go directly and build it in Eretz Israel alone. Kosh Baruch Hu said at some point in time we didn't respond to the call. Maybe at the end of the 1800s, the beginning of the 1900s, you can sit down and kind of figure out somewhat just by what people were saying and what they were thinking. But for some reason we did, and I suspect at the end of the 1800s, at that point in time, because you see from that like literally from that time and the early 1900s, you find all these Jews, especially from Russia, going to America, right? So somehow the thinking, because in the mid 1800s, and going back, let's say, to the time of the Grub, in the mid 1800s, there was a big awakening, a consciousness of returning to Zion at that time, and then it kind of like petered out somewhat. And as the anti-Semitism increased in Europe, and it increased specifically to move Jews out, it always moves to tell us that the Shekhinah is moving and to move Jews out. So the fact that it was already increasing at that time was just a build-up towards the 1930s and 1940s. Eventually was going to happen. It didn't get better. It just got worse and worse and worse. And eventually got to the World War I kind of interrupted the whole thing. But all of that was just to move the pieces around. So the fact that all these Jews are moving to North America, to America instead, and then eventually you have American the building of American Jewry even post-war, and you see all the money that came from American Jewry, all the success we had in America, the Shekhinah clearly went there instead of going to Eretz Israel. It would like to have gone from Europe, where it was with the Jewish people at that point in time, to Eretz Israel with the rest of the nation. But the nation was not going yet. They were not prepared to go yet. So therefore, Kosh Baruch Hu said, okay, so we're going to have to build this, in a backwards way. What's the backwards way? We'll go someplace else first, and then we'll make all kinds of money, and we'll funnel that money to Eretz Israel, and we'll build it with foreign money. Because that's Mimon Tachbolis. Because since we're not fulfilling the pasuk, Ki ratu avdechas avneha v'safreichenenu. That's the key phrase. That's the phrase that David HaMelech said is the key to the Gula. You have to want her stones. You have to cherish her dust. That's the key phrase. That's what brings the Rachmanis. That's what gets the Shekhinah to get up and to give mercy and to say this is the final redemption. If you're not ratzuing, the stones, and you're not desiring the dust, so Kosh Baruch Hu says, well, if it's not important to you, I guess it's not important to me. So I guess we'll go to another exile instead, and we'll go around the world. And then of course Europe just spread us to 4 quarters of the earth to fulfill the final prophecy. It didn't have to be that way, but once we didn't respond to the call, and we clearly didn't respond to the call. Why? Again, because how is it possible that this redemption can be coming through people like that? How is it possible? They're not even from. They're not even interested in what the long-term national goals of the Jewish people, right? So how's the Kosh Baruch Hu going to work through them? So the question is not how. How is all through Jewish history. That's clear. The question is why. Why? Because what happens immediately after the war? What does the war result in? Results in the founding of the Jewish state, right? Which we said before, and this fits perfectly with the Brisker Rav. as a we hold that the Germans, or at least Hitler himself, especially based upon the Brisker Rav Chaim Soloveitchik, that he was Amalek. He was Amalek in his time. You cannot have Amalek. You can't talk out of two sides of your mouth. You can't say he was Amalek and then ignore what Amalek means. Amalek doesn't just show up. It's like for example, oh look, there's the tax collector. What he's doing here today? He's coming to collect taxes. That's what tax collectors do. They don't just show up for a cup of coffee unless it's your best friend. It's like they come for a specific reason, right? So if Amalek shows up, he's showing up for a reason. There's no other way about it. Are you a believer? Are you believing Torah? Come on, make up your mind. Do you believe Torah is true? Or do you believe Torah is true only up until it was closed? Or into the time of Purim time, right? Or Hanukkah. At what point did the Torah stop being true? Or if it's still true today, then Amalek comes for a specific reason that the Torah tells you. And Rashi explains. So why does Amalek come? He comes to stop a Geula. That's the only reason why Amalek comes. He comes to stop Geula Shlema. And the rules of history are, when it comes to Amalek, he can be successful to an extent, he can mitigate the Geula, he can interfere with it, he cannot stop it completely. Something will still happen that's Geula-oriented. Har Sinai still took place. Mordechai and Esther still triumphed. But in each case, it wasn't what it was supposed to have been. Har Sinai is, we get Luchas Shnius, not the first ones. We don't get to the period of Mashiach as a result of that. And by Mordechai's time, he's only Merutz of Rav Achav. And most Jews stay behind and stay intermarried. They don't come back, and the whole thing just caves in and falls apart. There was a redemption, but it's only partial. Whenever Amalek shows up. So if Amalek, if you're going to say that the Hitler Machshma was Amalek, and he certainly had the Simanim to be that way, and all the Gedolim, Paskin, that's clearly the case, and the whole issue comes up about Mechias Amalek by Hitler. If you're going to call him Amalek, and if you're not going to call him Amalek, then we have an even worse problem. Because it turns out there's somebody just as bad as Amalek out there. There's another person. At least let it be Amalek. We can compartmentalize them to one reality, right? So once you call him Amalek, you have to say it had to be a time of redemption. It had to be. There had to be time, not just of partial redemption, of a complete redemption. And he came along and he mitigated it. He slowed it down and he interfered with it. So only it's like squeezing out of just a little bit comes out, right? So what a terrible mushal. But it's like I was thinking of toothpaste. It's a little bit different than the Gula Shlema, right? But he squeezed it and just a little bit of Gula came out. But what came out on the other side? What came out on the other side? You're looking around the world. It's like, gee, what can we say is Gula like after World War II? I'm looking over here, and I'm looking over here, and I'm looking over there. What was it? I got my pension check. I was able to find kosher food. What was it? What was the Gula after 1945 that was so Gula oriented? There's only one thing. There's only one thing. That was the foundation, the forming of the state of Israel.
So you could say that the Shekhinah. You said that the Shekhinah after Europe went to America, but really we're saying that the little bit of Geula that came over here, the Shekhinah is really splitting.
Yes.
Okay.
Right, yeah.
What if? So how does Ahmadinejad, assuming that he turns out to be a Malach, how does that fit into the Geula process? Could that be the final?
Yeah.
Right?
That's what we're counting on.
That's what we're counting on.
That's what it seems to be. That's all the indications to be
right.
seem to be pointing in that direction. He's like the last straw. Now, is he really? We don't know yet. We'll see in the end. Because it goes back and forth. Right. But right now, he is. It's Pras also. The fact that it's Persia is a very significant reality that cannot be underestimated. The prophecies talk about Persia at the end of days being a major trigger, whatever is going to happen in terms of the final showdown. But the things that he says, and the way that he thinks, and the way that he behaves, and the way that he acts, right, makes him historically important in that respect. But that's the way, So just to finish the thought, right? So people look and they say, "No way, no way." I mean, it's like it's hard to sit here, and people will look at you and they're going to say, but he's like, he doesn't look like a religious Zionist. He looks like he's kind of a Haredi kind of a guy, but he's saying that the state is part of that process. The state is part of that. I mean, after all these years of saying it's not, how can you say it? There's a very, very simple answer. Why don't you say it is? Why don't you say it is? Do you have a source? Do you have a source? You have a gematria? You got a nevuah? What do you got? What do you got? What are you going to say? No, look over here. This calendar. Look at astrology over here. There's no way because the things didn't. No, we don't have that. We don't have astrology to point it out. We don't have a sefer that says whatever happens, it won't happen in 1948. It doesn't say that. What are you basing yourself on? The three shvuos in the Gemara and Kesuvas, when most people hold that's allegorical, and anyhow we were makayim them anyhow. We did the right thing. We did the proper way, and just the opposite. It's like literally a proof. So what? What is it that's bothering you? What's confusing you?
So
One thing.
So what you're saying is it's the paradigm here of the Mirmas Tafolis, and it's the paradigm of that, of the fact that Amalek appears, and this is a criteria that would have to happen in the process of Geula happening, which is really most people are not aware that this is the process of how it takes place.
Even though Chumash is loaded with examples, but they never pronounced it. They never enunciated what was going on. They never actualized the conceptual reality of what happened with Yehud and Tamar, right? Or what happened with Lot and his daughters, or what happened with Rus, or what happened with David HaMelech in his lifetime, or what happened with Rachav and Yeshua ben Nun. They never said to themselves, "Is this a rule? Is this the way? Are these just freaks of history? In which case, we don't have to pay attention to them. We just be entertained by them. Wow, that's a really interesting story over there."
Back to your whole thing about what you started with when you talked about Yosef being the one. How can it happen through him?
Yeah.
So the fact is, we're seeing the same thing happen over and over and over again, and our bias doesn't allow us to see how it happened through him. It's the same thing.
So now you take the point one step further, right? Who was the cause of the problem? Yosef?
No,
he was the cause of the problem?
No, we're the cause.
The brothers were.
Right.
It was the brothers who created Yosef. Right. Yosef should have been straightforward. Yaakov saw that. Avraham saw that, and Yitzchak saw that, and the Avos were straight. They saw things the way they had to be. That's why they were unique. The brothers deviated. And we begin to see this in Shechem, right? They're on the radar now. In Shechem, Shimon and Levi, this terrible thing happens, right? Yaakov's dealing with it. He's like fitting into the picture, into the framework, and the Mizgeret, and he's working it out. And Shimon and Levi, they go ahead and they proactively try and rectify the situation without the Chachma to do so, and it becomes an unmitigated disaster.
I saw something. You probably know about this. I saw something in that really, when Dinah was raped, right? When she was raped by Shechem, they were the Chivites, and Chivite is a name in what do you call it, in Aramaic for a snake. So I don't know. I heard this. I learned this someplace that she was really there to mataki in the Nachash. In other words, her, and then what happened was, in other words, because she did not
the Nachash, the effect of the Nachash.
Okay, all right.
Because the Medrash says this is the mind. This is the mind-boggling. This is the mind-blowing thing. It's got to blow your mind.
Okay,
it's got to blow your mind, right? Out of this interaction with Shechem ben Chamor, Shechem, the son of a donkey, we can't get much lower than that, right? Comes Asnas, born from Dinah. Right. So the Rizal says, and he brings all this.
Ultimately evicted.
He brings down a source, right? The Rizal brings a source kabbalistically to show how basically Asnas was the last netzotz of Adam Rishon that was on the side of Tuma. Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov have rectified everything else, but there's one netzotz left on the side of Tuma. Where was it? In Shechem. And Dinah was pod of that. She took it out. It became Asnas, who marries Yosef, who gives birth to Ephraim and Menashe, the source of Mashiach at the end of history. Come on! Can't you just do things more straightforward? Everything is like happened backwards. There's such a this terrible, and Yaakov is thinking to himself, what positive thing could result from all of this type of reality? But Shimon and Levi, they miss it completely because they're expecting things to be straightforward. This could only be a violation of a daughter of Yaakov, and therefore there can only be an act of revenge. And Yaakov says, no, that's not what Yisrael's about. A Yisrael is a royas and noiled. Yisrael is somebody. Yisrael is a big picture person. Big picture. You get the big picture. That's it. That's a Yisrael. He takes from over here, and he constructs these, and then you begin to see the world the way God sees the world. That's what's going on all through history. I mean, are you a believer? Do you believe in Hashgacha Pratis? Do you believe in the historical process of redemption? Do you believe in the idea that Hashem's always working towards Gula, and that even if we're not? I mean, these are all fundamentals of Jewish Hashgacha. You can't just sit around in your hands and say, I ignore everything else but this. It's all part of one big picture in the end. So they have to start asking the questions, why? So the person said, how is it possible that something so holy as the beginnings of redemption can happen through, quote-unquote, such unholy people? You can't, push it aside. Well, what about you? Yeah, 100%. Strange shlichim. Strange messengers. But that's a chiddush. In Jewish history, that's a chiddush. That's mimut tachbolas. That's what happens to the Jewish people when we don't do it the straightforward. It's convoluted. 100%. God would be the first one to say, this is convoluted. Absolutely. I'd much rather bring the Gula, Achishena, and riding on a cloud, where the nation is from, and they're living by Torah, and they come back and they build the base of Mikdash, and everybody's doing the Kiddush Hashem they're supposed to be doing, and the world goes, wow, this is God. Yeah, I would love to do it that way. That's my plan from day one. But you guys, it's not what you guys are going to do. You're not yet doing that. You're not into the program over here. But I got my timeline. I've got my history that I have to keep. I've got the things that I've got to make happen by certain timelines.
So getting back to,
but just to finish up, this is the idea that a person has to overcome all those negative realities and negative thoughts and disbelief that a Kosh Baruch Hu could possibly give the land to the Jewish people through people like this who themselves might have been kofrim in the end. How is it possible? What are you talking about? That is Jewish history. That is Jewish history by definition. Because the lack of desire on our part, because we're not makayim the pasuk ki ratzu v'dechas of ne'avas afrayich hanenu, we're not desiring geula with everything we have and taking it serious in our davening and crying for it. It has to happen in a convoluted manner. Kosh Baruch Hu has to still fulfill the timeline, bring it about, and therefore it has to happen in a way that the Sitra Achra will think it's the opposite what's taking place. Until he finally wakes up and realizes it's not the case. But in the meantime, that's the way the land was transferred back to the Jewish people, without the Sitra Achra getting involved saying, you can't do that, that's not fair, they don't deserve that. Because Baruch Hu says, there's bris avos in the end. But, to keep with my rules, I'll at least do it in a way that makes it look like it's not really taking place.